The night Elena Whitmore understood that love could fracture without warning, she was not screaming or crying. She was standing in the quiet kitchen of the apartment she shared with Nathaniel Cross, staring at the soft glow of the stove clock, wondering when warmth had quietly turned into distance. 2 years earlier, everything between them had felt inevitable. Elena met Nate on an October evening soaked in rain. She had rushed into a small downtown coffee shop to escape the storm, her hair damp, her patience thinner than usual after a long shift at the design studio. Nate had been at the counter arguing playfully with the barista about whether cinnamon belonged in espresso. He glanced at her once, just once, and smiled as though he had been expecting her. Their conversation began with sarcasm and ended with shared laughter at a corner table. Nate spoke with a confidence that never felt arrogant. He asked questions and listened to the answers. Elena, who guarded her inner world carefully, found herself unfolding with surprising ease. By the time the rain stopped, she knew she wanted to see him again. The first months were a sequence of late-night drives, spontaneous dinners, and conversations that stretched until sunrise. Nate talked about building something meaningful in his marketing career, about wanting a home filled with music and purpose. Elena shared her dreams of opening her own creative agency one day. They spoke not only about ambition, but about fear, about childhood disappointments, and the quiet need to be chosen wholeheartedly. Nate chose her loudly. He showed up with coffee at her office. He left handwritten notes in her bag. He introduced her to colleagues as the best thing that's happened to me. When he looked at her, there was no hesitation in his expression. Elena, who had once believed love required sacrifice and restraint, began to believe it could also mean safety. Within a year, they moved into a modest apartment overlooking a busy intersection. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. They painted the walls themselves, arguing over shades of cream and laughing when they spilled paint across the floor. They built routines: Sunday grocery runs, Wednesday takeout, Friday movie nights. Their life developed a rhythm that felt steady and intentional. One evening, after dinner on the balcony, Nate slipped a simple silver ring onto Elena's finger. It wasn't an engagement ring, he explained, but a promise. "I'm building toward forever," he told her, his voice firm. Elena believed him without question. Yet stability can sometimes disguise slow change. As Nate's responsibilities at work increased, so did his hours. What began as occasional late meetings became a pattern. He came home tired, distracted, sometimes already halfway into tomorrow's worries. Elena reassured herself that ambition required effort. She admired his drive. She did not want to be the obstacle that slowed him. Still, small shifts unsettled her. Nate started placing his phone face down on the table. When messages arrived late at night, he responded quickly but vaguely. "Just work," he would say, brushing a kiss across her forehead before stepping into another room. Elena told herself she was imagining tension because she feared losing something good. One Saturday morning, while Nate showered before heading to an unexpected meeting, his phone buzzed repeatedly on the kitchen counter. Elena had no intention of looking. She trusted him. But the screen lit up again, and instinct pulled her gaze that a name appeared. Vivian H. The message preview was brief. "Last night meant more than you think." No emoji. No explanation. That Elena's heartbeat stuttered. She did not unlock the phone. She did not scroll further. She simply stared at the words until the screen dimmed. When Nate emerged, towel slung casually over his shoulder, he looked exactly as he always had. Familiar, handsome, confident. Elena studied his face for a trace of guilt and found none. That frightened her more than anything. "Everything okay?" he asked, noticing her stillness. "Yeah," she replied too quickly. "Just tired." He kissed her temple and left for work. Elena remained in the kitchen long after the door shut. She replayed every recent conversation, every late meeting, every distant glance. She wanted an explanation that protected the version of Nate she loved. She wanted proof that the message meant nothing. Instead of confronting him, she chose silence. She told herself relationships required trust, not suspicion. She told herself that insecurity could destroy something beautiful faster than any outside influence. But doubt had already taken root. That evening, Nate returned home later than promised. He offered a vague story about a campaign deadline and collapsed onto the couch. Elena sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of his arm, yet strangely aware of space between them. For the first time since that rainy night in the coffee shop, she wondered whether she was the only one still building toward forever. She slipped the silver promise ring off her finger and turned it slowly in her palm, listening to Nate's steady breathing as he drifted to sleep. The metal felt colder than it had before. Elena did not cry. She simply realized that love, no matter how passionately it begins, can change without announcing itself. And somewhere between ambition and distraction, between late nights and unanswered questions, something fragile had begun to crack. Elena Whitmore used to believe that love, once chosen with sincerity, became something close to permanent. Not effortless, not flawless, but durable, like the old oak table she and Caleb Mercer had rescued from a roadside antique sale during their first year of marriage. It had scratches and uneven legs, yet it never failed them. For a long time, she thought their relationship was built the same way. She met Caleb on a cool October evening at a charity fundraiser held inside a renovated library in downtown Portland. Elena had been hired to proofread the event brochures, quietly correcting misplaced commas while volunteers hurried past her. Caleb arrived late, apologizing to everyone within earshot as he shrugged off his coat and revealed a crooked tie he clearly didn't know how to fix. When he caught her watching him struggle, he smiled, not with embarrassment, but with a kind of open amusement that made her feel immediately at ease. "Is it that obvious?" he asked, gesturing toward the tie. "Only to someone professionally trained to notice details," Elena replied, stepping forward before she could second-guess herself. She straightened the knot with careful fingers. Caleb stayed very still, as though aware that small moments sometimes carried unusual weight. They talked for nearly an hour beside a window, streaked with rain. Caleb spoke about designing buildings that would outlast him. Elena spoke about her love for stories that revealed the hidden layers inside ordinary people. By the end of the evening, it felt less like they had met and more like they had resumed a conversation interrupted years ago. Their courtship unfolded without drama. Caleb brought her coffee exactly the way she liked it. No sugar, a trace of cinnamon. And Elena learned that Caleb whistled softly when concentrating on architectural sketches. They rented a modest apartment filled with secondhand furniture and laughter that startled the neighbors through thin walls. When Caleb proposed during a quiet hike, his voice trembled so much that Elena said yes before he could finish the question. Marriage suited them. They developed rituals, Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks regardless of weather, reading in companionable silence. Caleb listened when Elena spoke, the kind of listening that made her feel not merely heard but understood. In return, she admired his restless ambition and the discipline with which he chased it. "Someday," Caleb told her often, "I'll design a home just for us. Every window exactly where the light belongs." Elena believed him because he had never given her a reason not to. The first shift was so subtle that she almost missed it. Caleb's firm won a high-profile contract, and with it came a promotion that he accepted with equal parts pride and apprehension. The project demanded late nights, urgent revisions, and endless meetings. Elena reassured herself that this was temporary. The natural turbulence of success. Tea first. Caleb compensated for his absence with enthusiasm when he was home, recounting office mishaps and improbable deadlines. Yet gradually those stories shortened, then disappeared altogether. "How was your day?" she asked one evening. "Busy," he answered, loosening his collar while scanning his phone. The single word landed between them like a closed door. Elena noticed other changes she could not easily name. Caleb began carrying his phone everywhere, even from the kitchen to the living room. He angled the screen away without seeming aware he was doing it. Sometimes a message would arrive, and a smile would flicker across his face, brief but unmistakably private. When she asked what amused him, he would simply say, "Work stuff." She told herself she was imagining distance because she missed him. One Thursday, Caleb mentioned a new colleague during dinner. "Her name's Jade Holloway," he said, reaching for the salt. Honestly, she might be the sharpest project coordinator we've ever had. Catches problems before they exist. There was admiration in his voice, but admiration wasn't unusual. Caleb respected competence. Still, Elena registered the way his expression brightened as he spoke, how the fatigue seemed to lift momentarily from his shoulders. "Sounds like she makes your life easier," Elena said lightly. "She does," Caleb replied, then added after a pause, The whole team stronger because of her. It was an ordinary conversation, yet later that night Elena found herself replaying it without knowing why. Weeks passed. Caleb's schedule hardened into unpredictability. Dinners cooled untouched on the stove, while Elena waited through vague texts promising he'd be just another hour. Sometimes he returned after she had fallen asleep, sliding into bed with the careful quiet of a guest. Determined not to let routine swallow them, Elena planned a small anniversary dinner at the restaurant where they had celebrated their engagement. She wore the blue dress Caleb once said reminded him of Twilight and arrived early to request their favorite corner table, T7. She checked her phone. No message. By 7:30. The candle had burned. T8. A text appeared. Emergency at work. I'm so sorry. Rain check. Elena stared at the screen until the words blurred. Emergencies happened. She knew that. Yet something about the brevity unsettled her, as though the apology had been drafted quickly between more important thoughts. She told the waiter she'd take the meal to go. Carrying the neatly packed containers home, she rehearsed gracious responses she might offer when Caleb apologized in person. But when she entered the apartment, it was dark and silent. Later, while organizing receipts for their shared budget, she noticed that the restaurant reservation had never been canceled. The charge remained exactly as planned. Proof that until the last moment, Caleb had intended to be there. The realization unsettled her more than anger might have. Plans didn't simply dissolve without explanation. They were abandoned. When Caleb came home, close to midnight, exhaustion clung to him like damp air. He kissed her forehead, murmured another apology, and promised they would celebrate properly soon. Elena nodded, studying his face for traces of the man who once counted the hours until he could see her. That night, sleep refused her. She lay awake listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering when silence had become their most frequent conversation, in the days that followed. Elena wrestled with questions she could not voice. Love required trust. She had always believed that. But did trust mean ignoring the quiet signals of change, or did it demand the courage to look directly at them? One evening, while folding laundry, she caught herself realizing she no longer knew what filled Caleb's days, or his thoughts. The recognition felt less like jealousy and more like standing in a familiar room that suddenly seemed rearranged. She sat at the oak table, running her fingers along its worn edge, remembering the couple who had carried it upstairs laughing, convinced that whatever life brought, they would meet it side by side. Now she wondered when side by side had become parallel. Elena Whitmore decided that uncertainty was more corrosive than truth. That on Monday morning, she woke before Nathaniel Cross and lay still beside him, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. She studied the familiar curve of his shoulder, the faint crease between his brows that deepened when he slept. Loving him had once felt effortless. Now it required restraint. When his alarm rang, Nate reached immediately for his phone. The motion was automatic, almost protective. Elena noticed how his thumb moved quickly across the screen before he even greeted her. "Morning," she said softly. "Hey," he replied, distracted. "Big week ahead. For you or for us?" The question slipped out before she could soften it. Nate paused, then offered a tight smile. "For work. Don't start today like this." Elena nodded, though she hadn't realized she had started anything. She simply wanted clarity. After he left, she remained seated at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from her. She replayed Vivian Hartley's photo in her mind. Nate leaning toward her, eyes engaged, posture open. It was subtle, but intimacy often is. By afternoon, Elena made a choice she had avoided for weeks. She would confront him, not with accusations, but with honesty. That evening, Nate returned earlier than usual. He seemed almost relieved to see her waiting in the living room, as if he had sensed the shift in her resolve. "We need to talk," Elena said, her voice steady. Nate exhaled slowly, already bracing. "About what?" "About Vivian." The name hung between them like a test. Neither could escape. Nate's expression tightened, but he did not look surprised. "She's a co-worker." "She's more than that," Elena replied. "You light up when you talk about her. You guard your phone. You come home later and later. I'm not imagining this." Silence stretched, heavy and undeniable. "It's not what you think," Nate said finally, though the defense sounded practiced. Then tell me what it is. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once before stopping in front of her. She understands the pressure I'm under. We work closely. That's all. That's not all, Elena insisted. You used to talk to me about pressure. You used to confide in me. Nate's jaw tightened. You've been distant too. The accusation startled her. Distant? I've been trying to hold us together. By watching me? By questioning every late meeting. His tone sharpened. You don't trust me. Elena felt the conversation tilting away from truth toward blame. She forced herself to remain calm. Trust isn't blindness, Nate. It's transparency. And you haven't been transparent. For a moment, he looked as though he might say something honest, something vulnerable. Instead, he turned away. Nothing physical has happened, he said quietly. The wording struck her harder than any confession. Nothing physical, she repeated. So, something emotional has. Nate hesitated, and in that pause, Elena found her answer. I didn't plan it, he admitted. It just happened. We started talking. She listens. She challenges me. I feel alive. Elena finished. He did not deny it. The room seemed smaller, the walls pressing inward. Elena understood that betrayal does not always begin with touch. It begins with choosing someone else for the parts of yourself that once belonged at home. Do you love her? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nate closed his eyes briefly. I don't know. The uncertainty hurt more than a definitive yes. Elena felt anger rise, but beneath it was grief. She had built a life around the certainty of his commitment. Now, she stood facing the possibility that she had been competing for space in his heart without realizing it. Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy? She asked. I'm not unhappy, Nate replied quickly. I don't know who I am right now. Work is changing. I'm changing. And I'm supposed to accept that you explore that with someone else? Elena's composure wavered. You promised me we'd build together. I haven't broken that promise, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. You already have, she said. The silence that followed was different from their earlier arguments. It carried finality. Nate sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. I need time to figure this out. Elena studied him, realizing that his request for time was another way of asking for freedom without consequence. You're asking me to wait while you decide if I'm enough, she said. That's not fair. It's exactly what you're doing. For the first time, Nate looked genuinely shaken. He had expected resistance, perhaps tears, but not clarity. Elena stood slowly. I won't compete for you. If you're unsure, then you've already stepped away from us. She walked to the bedroom and retrieved the silver promise ring from the drawer. Returning to the living room, she placed it on the coffee table between them. I believed in this, she said. I believed in you. Nate stared at the ring as though seeing it for the first time. I never meant to hurt you, he murmured. I know, Elena replied. But intention doesn't erase impact. She picked up her coat and keys. Where are you going? He asked, rising abruptly. To stay with Caleb for a few days, she answered. You said you need time. I'm giving it to you. Don't do this impulsively. This isn't impulsive, she said gently. It's self-respect. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them held memories, rainy nights, painted walls, whispered promises. But memory could not repair what honesty had exposed. As Elena reached the door, Nate's voice followed her. Elena, I do love you. She paused, her hand resting on the handle. Then figure out why that wasn't enough to protect us, she said without turning back. The door closed softly behind her. Inside the apartment, Nate stood alone with the promise ring glinting under the dim light, forced to confront the cost of emotional distance. And outside, walking into the cool night air, Elena realized that love may fracture quietly, but reclaiming yourself requires courage loud enough to walk away. Caleb Whitmore did not ask many questions when Elena arrived at his apartment with a single suitcase and guarded eyes. He simply stepped aside, took the bag from her hand, and said, Stay as long as you need. In the quiet of his guest room, Elena allowed herself to feel what she had restrained for weeks. The hurt was not loud or dramatic. It was steady and disorienting. Nathaniel Cross had not betrayed her with a single reckless act. He had drifted, and in that drift, he had taken pieces of their intimacy with him. The next morning, Nate called. She watched his name illuminate her phone and let it ring twice before answering. Did you sleep? He asked, his voice strained. Some, she replied. I didn't, he admitted. The apartment feels wrong. Elena absorbed the irony. It had felt wrong long before she left. I've been thinking, Nate continued, about everything. Thinking isn't deciding, she said gently. He hesitated. Vivian texted me last night. The admission tightened something inside her, but she forced herself to remain composed. And I didn't respond. Elena closed her eyes briefly. She did not know whether there was progress or merely delay. She wants clarity, Nate said. She says she doesn't want to be a secret. The words confirmed what Elena already understood. The emotional boundary had been crossed long ago. And what do you want? Elena asked. Silence filled the line. When Nate finally spoke, his voice carried uncertainty she had never heard before. I don't want to lose you. That's not the same as choosing me, she replied. After they ended the call, Elena realized something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer fighting to convince him of her worth. She was evaluating whether his indecision aligned with her standards. Later that afternoon, she scheduled an appointment with Dr. Marissa Cole, a therapist Caleb had once recommended during a difficult period in his own life. Elena did not view therapy as surrender. She saw it as recalibration. During the session, Dr. Cole listened without interruption as Elena described the gradual erosion of trust. He didn't cheat physically, Elena said, as though still trying to define the boundary. Do you feel betrayed? Dr. Cole asked. Yes. Then your experience is valid. Dr. Cole replied calmly. Emotional intimacy redirected outside a committed relationship can feel just as destabilizing. Elena considered that. She had been minimizing her pain because it lacked visible scandal. Yet betrayal does not require spectacle to wound deeply. What scares you most? Dr. Cole continued. That he might choose her, Elena admitted. Or worse, that he might choose me out of comfort. Dr. Cole nodded. Then your task isn't to wait for his clarity. It's to define your own. That evening, Nate appeared at Caleb's apartment unannounced. Caleb answered the door first, his posture protective but restrained. He's here for me, Elena said, stepping into the hallway. Nate looked exhausted, as though indecision had aged him overnight. He held the silver promise ring in his palm. I spoke to Vivian, he began immediately. I told her I can't continue whatever this is. Elena watched his face carefully. Because you love me? Because I realized I was using her to escape pressure, he said honestly. And that's not fair to anyone. Honesty, even imperfect, felt different from defensiveness. Did you tell her you love her? Elena asked. No, he answered without hesitation. I don't. Elena searched for certainty in his eyes and found something steadier than before. Remorse. I was selfish, Nate continued. I like feeling admired. I like being understood without having to explain myself. But that doesn't excuse crossing a line. Why didn't you fight for us before it reached that point? She asked. I didn't recognize how far I drifted, he admitted. And when I did, I was afraid you'd see me differently. I do see you differently, Elena said softly. But not beyond repair. Hope flickered between them, fragile but real. Nate extended his hand, offering the ring. I don't deserve to ask you to wear this again, but I want to earn back what I risked. Elena did not take it immediately. Trust isn't restored by cutting someone off, she said. It's rebuilt through consistency. I know, Nate replied. I'm willing to do that work. Counseling, transparency, whatever it takes. She believed he meant it. The question was whether meaning would translate into action. I won't move back yet, Elena said after a long pause. If we try again, it has to be deliberate. No assumptions. No half-truths. Nate nodded. Then we start there. Caleb watched from a distance, but did not intervene. He understood that reconciliation, like separation, must be chosen freely. As Nate prepared to leave, he stopped at the doorway. I never stopped loving you, he said quietly. Elena met his gaze. Love isn't just a feeling, Nate. It's protection. After he left, she held the promise ring in her hand, feeling its familiar weight. It no longer symbolized blind certainty. It represented a decision, one that required vigilance, honesty, and mutual effort. Elena did not slip it back on her finger that night. Instead, she placed it on the bedside table, not as a restored promise, but as a possibility. Outside, the city moved forward as it always did, indifferent to fractured hearts and fragile reconciliations. Inside, Elena understood that forgiveness was not weakness. It was measured courage. Whether their story would become one of redemption or final release remained unwritten. But this time, whatever future unfolded, Elena Whitmore would not abandon herself to keep it.